Many of us are concerned about finding a safe place to live in the world, legally eliminating our tax bills so that we're not funding a war, especially a war that is closing down our church, to say the least, how awful that is. Well, Mikkel Thorup, host of the Expat Money Show podcast, is hosting a free online event at expatmoneysummit.com. They're going to discuss things like, well, legally eliminating your tax bill, like I said, international wealth protection, second passports, offshore banking. It's going to be the largest offshore event in the world. Now check this out. You want to hear some speakers? First and foremost is one of my heroes, Ron Paul. The great Ron Paul will be speaking. But check this out. Peter Schiff will be speaking. The great Tom Woods will be speaking. Friend of the show, Tom Luongo, will be speaking. Doug Casey, Mark Faber, Jim Rogers, plus international lawyers, offshore precious metal dealers, foreign real estate experts, and much, much more. You can pick up a free ticket. That's free at expatmoneysummit.com. Again, it's Mikkel Thorup, host of the Expat Money Show podcast, hosting a free online event. Pick your ticket up at expatmoneysummit.com. Let's get back to the show. This episode is dedicated to one of our favorite listeners, Lily. We are praying for you and we are thinking about you.
You are now listening to the Counterflow Podcast, a place for dissonant voices and unapproved opinions.
You get split in half, the icon, the hologram graph, but I am the center inside the placenta of math. You clash with cyanide gas and die fast. Rhythmical equivalent of solids, liquid and gas. We smash your sinus with the power of Lord Titus, but I am the virus inside of the iris of Cyrus.
Here is your host and humble narrator, Buck Johnson.
What's up, you guys? Welcome back once again. This is the Counterflow Podcast. As always, I am your host and humble narrator, Buck Johnson. Thanks for being here with us yet again. Yet another week here, and this is a good one. I say this a few times in this discussion, but this type of discussion sums up so much of what this show has been about since its very inception, way back a few years ago. We get into economics, we get into culture, we get into politics, we get into religion. This is a good one. This is an article published over at Orthodox Reflections by my friend and the guest today, Nicholas. You'll see, if you're watching the video version of this, that he can't show his face. So that's because of some of the things we talk about and some of the things they very bravely write about over at Orthodox Reflections. He must go incognito. We don't want him getting in trouble. And I think you'll understand that if you listen to this type of show on a regular basis. So let's just get to it right now. Welcome back to the show, Nicholas from Orthodox Reflections. How are you, sir?
I'm doing great, Buck. How are you doing today?
I'm good. I'm ready for it to not be 100 degrees, but other than that, I can't really complain. We're going to talk about topics in this interview that I find so interesting. Sometimes it can be a little black-pilling. Some of it's a little bit bleak, I suppose. But I think we'll end up with some words of some happy thoughts. I think we'll see how it gets there. But this piece over at Orthodox Reflections, unbelievable. It's I was telling you before we started recording, it kind of encompasses so many ideas that I've spoke about on this show way before I was Orthodox, back when it was still called Death to Tyrants. It's got politics. Now it does have Orthodox stuff in it. It's got banking stuff, and it's ESG, DEI, all of these topics, the Federal Reserve. So we'll hit all of this. Go ahead. You've been on the show before, but there's always new listeners. So can you talk about what you guys do over at Orthodox Reflections? And then I want to get to what you do in terms of what we're going to talk about today, because people are going to hear this crazy stuff and go, well, how's this guy know? And you work in an industry where you do know a lot of this stuff. So I'll let you take it from here.
All right. Well, thanks, Bug. So over at Orthodox Reflections, we do have some priests, and we do have some theologically educated individuals that do write for us, but primarily we're professionals. So we're either, like myself, I'm in the technology and banking industry. So I've been in banking now for a little over 25 years, worked in 32 countries in doing various projects and contracts within banking. I currently handle a suite of multinational banking products myself as a product director. So this is my area of expertise. So I tend to write about politics. I tend to write about a lot about business, and I tend to write a lot about economics. We have others at Orthodox Reflections that come from the medical industry. They come from a medical background, so they're writing about either the vaccines or just the politics or business around pharma, around that medical industrial complex. And so that's kind of where we come from. We come from that space where we're looking at life through an Orthodox filter, but we're also bringing to the table our background and our expertise.
Yeah, it's like it's the website that kind of encapsulates what I like to cover on this show, and now through an Orthodox lens. So I love what y'all do over there. This piece, like I said, it ties together so many ideas and topics that I've talked about for the last several years on this show. And I'll let you give kind of a summary of the general idea before we dive deep into, there's a lot. So it's called There Is No Free Market Democracy in America. So we'll just let you start with kind of the premise here, and then we'll dive in deep.
Well, sort of the premise is that a lot of anti-woke activists were really crowing. It seems like things are going really well. They brought Target down. The Target stock is way down after Target made its horrendous choice to try to brainwash children in its stores. Bud Light, we're all familiar with what's happening with Bud Light. And so its parent company has had a lot of market capitalization losses. And Disney, of course, my goodness, Disney, the behemoth that it is now down, $1 billion or so in losses over the last 9 films. But that's the apparent side of the ledger. I mean, those are the businesses that you're familiar with, but who owns those businesses? Who's actually in control? Now, of course, what you'll say is the shareholders are, but are the shareholders themselves running around buying shares of Disney? Are they buying shares of Target? Is it the individual shareholders, even the shareholders we think about, like a George Soros, the billionaires, are they really the ones that are driving the economic ship? And the answer is no. So there are companies that most Americans have never heard of, Vanguard, BlackRock, these major asset management companies, and they own pieces of every single one of the S&P 500 companies.
Wow.
They're expanding into buying up homes. So they're in the real estate market. They're buying up farmland. They're in all these investment spaces that you don't necessarily think of. Those companies, the asset aggregators who are making decisions about investments, those are the companies that are really in the driver's seat. And so one of the statistics that we put in the article was there are 2,640 billionaires on the planet for a worth of $2.1 trillion. Now that's your Buffetts, that's your Soros. Those are all the ones, the Bill Gates, those are the ones that us, traditional conservatives, we tend to focus on those guys. How many articles have you seen on conservative-leaning websites that would have Bill Gates' face up there?
Right.
$2.1 trillion. Buck, you can buy a lot of influence for $2.1 trillion. Well, BlackRock by itself controls investments worth over $10 trillion. And that's just one of these companies. One of these companies has over $10 trillion, more than all the billionaires, much more than all billionaires combined. So to a large extent, I just feel like we've been looking in the wrong place. If you've got a company like BlackRock, and we put this in the article. So a company like BlackRock that owns Target,
right?
But also, so they're the 4th largest investor in Target. They're the 2nd largest investor in Walmart.
Mm-hmm.
Yay, we've successfully hurt Target because of their woke. Well, but from BlackRock's perspective, they own both.
Yeah.
Heads they win, tails they win.
Right.
So what difference does it make to them if what they're looking for is to promote an agenda, and you mentioned the ESG agenda, What if their goals are to have sort of a general overall market return, which is why they basically own everyone, and promote an agenda, then how exactly do you hurt BlackRock or Vanguard when all of their investments are hedged? You hurt one beer, they own all the other beers too.
Right.
So, and then in terms of democracy, you know, gosh, I've been in politics at the local level and the state level. I've been involved in politics 30 plus years, and nothing ever changes at the top level. Now, what's amusing to me is that we have the phrase in English, you can't fight City Hall, but City Hall is actually what you can fight. Fighting Washington is what's almost impossible, but people really don't focus nearly as much as City Hall as they do on what's happening in Washington. And what's happening in Washington is the government of the United States is not there to serve you. It's there to serve the global investment class that we had just been talking about. And that's why whatever is happening never benefits the middle or working classes. It benefits the upper 1% of the 1%.
And these companies, I had mentioned it to someone, and they immediately said, "Oh, I think I forget the phrase, but it was something along the lines of my 401k is run through BlackRock or Vanguard." Is that kind of because they kind of have a stranglehold on a lot of the retirement assets, I suppose, of a lot of Americans.
Absolutely. All the assets of all American retirement funds are over $35 trillion. And the entire United States annual gross domestic product is only $25 trillion. So it's the dream that we all have when we're investing either in our 403B, if we're working in the nonprofit or medical space, the 401k, it is the dream of the defined benefits pension because maybe we have a job that pays out that pension. It's that dream of being able to retire, to stop work, that is being used against us. It has been weaponized. But it's our dream. They've sold us this dream that we're going to bust our humps so that in our dotage, we're going to be able to sit around and drink 2-for-1 margaritas in the afternoon and just chill. It's that lifestyle, particularly being here in Florida. You see, that lifestyle is what we're marketing to the entire United States. Come to Florida, live on the beach, live in the villages, live off your 401k, and live your best life between age 65 and wherever it is that you expire and go meet Jesus. And so this is the dream they've sold us. And in order to achieve that dream, we've invested all this money, and all this money has been hoovered up by these major asset management companies, and they've used it against us. And not just against us, they've used it against the entire world. So when you have child labor slaving away in Africa or Asia, when you have poor people in other countries working for pennies being exploited, that's at the behest of looking for greater returns from asset management companies that are investing Americans' 401ks.
Are BlackRock, I mean, I think I know the answer to this. Maybe I'm even looking for the why because I don't quite get it. I assume BlackRock, Vanguard, and State Street, I believe, was the other one. They're the ones pushing this ESG stuff and DEI rather than an actual, let's say, target itself. Is that the case?
It is. I mean, I think there's a widespread acceptance at the corporate level of ESG and also diversity, equity, inclusion. I mean, all the good people are doing it. It's a virtual signal. Everyone has. If you're into environmentally sustainable production, if you're into electric cars, if you say all the right things, it's the new orthodoxy. We have our orthodoxy, Buck, and it would be encapsulated with the Nicene Creed. This is their orthodoxy.
Wow.
So all the good people do this. But at the same time, if you stop to think about, for example, the regulatory regimes, okay? Nobody's going to jail for poisoning water.
Right.
So RFK Jr., for example, talks a lot about that, about the various forever chemicals that are in water. So we have environmental catastrophes that are ongoing, that are corporate caused, that are completely ignored because everybody's focusing on cows breathing. Everyone's
Right.
focused on carbon.
Yeah.
So there is a lot of redirect to this. So it's virtual signaling, yes. There's probably quite a few of these guys that actually believe it. Who knows? I mean, crazy things happen at Yale. But at the same time, this is an amazing redirect. We get you focused on these topics, and you totally forget about the fact that, for example, the United States dollar is drowning right now. And
Right.
the average
Right.
American is drowning. You forget about the fact that we've poisoned you. You totally forget about the fact that we manipulated the system to force you to take an unproven mRNA jab that made us billions.
hmm
More money just off in 2022, just off the jab, than what they had made back in 2019 off all products combined. And so it's just a wonderful and amazing redirect.
Yes, it is. It's sadly brilliant. You just mentioned the U.S. dollar. I want to ask you about something I used to talk about all the time on this show, but it's been quite some time, the Federal Reserve, because it seems like groups like the Federal Reserve and these companies that we're talking about are all tied up, and it's almost like it's ingrained now with the the federal government. These companies through the Federal Reserve up to the federal government. It's like this one big mesh of blob, kind of.
Yeah, it's a good way to phrase it, the blob. Right. So, I mean, if we start to have any kind of economic downturn, what is it that the Fed starts to do? It starts to pump money into the economy, but it's
Right.
looking, what is it that everyone focuses on? The stock market.
hmm
So you start pumping money into the economy to try to buoy assets to provide liquidity. That liquidity tends to pool in speculative assets. And so it ends up in the stock market, inflating the stock market, ends up inflating real estate, and it ends up inflating other assets that you would see investments flow into. So the dollar, the Federal Reserve has been amazingly successful at destroying the dollar.
Yes.
It has not been so it was founded to preserve,
Right.
officially to preserve the value of the dollar.
Yeah.
But the dollar is down over 95% since the Fed was founded in terms of real purchasing power. Now, I'll take a quick segue if it's okay with you,
Sure. Yeah.
Buck. So I taught for 3 years. I taught in Poland at the university there in one of the major Polish cities. So I arrived in Poland in 1992, and it was 12,000 Polish zloty to a dollar in 1992. By 1995, when I was getting ready to leave, it was 40,000 to a dollar.
Wow.
So I watched a complete currency implosion.
Jeez.
I
Yeah.
felt it. My first year in Poland, I was making a decent salary. I was converting that back into dollars. I was traveling. So my first year in Poland, I'm going to France. I'm going to Vienna. I'm taking trips outside Poland. By my second year in Poland, as that currency continued to nosedive, even though I was making more money in terms of zloty, I was starting to take trips inside Poland. And then by the time I fled Poland with my blue American passport, shouting hallelujah all the way down the jetway, I was concerned about whether or not I could get food.
Wow. Okay.
And so having been through that, I'm extremely sensitive to changes in purchasing power of a currency. Imagine getting paid in millions.
Yeah.
I was literally being handed millions zloty notes. And well, the way Poland actually handled it was they created a new currency. So they floated the Polish new zloty. They essentially cut four decimal positions off the currency. They still had, for a couple of years, they had the old zloty circulating, then they had the Polish new zloty circulating. That was more rationalized. So what had been a million was now 100 banknote. So instead of being a million zloty, it was 100 Polish new zloty. And to a certain extent, that's always a solution. The Turks have done it. They had the old lira. They had the new lira. The old lira was blown up. Then they went to new one. Zimbabwe's done it. Lots of countries have done it. Germany did it under Weimar. And lo and behold, Buck, as we're talking about the decline in the use of the dollar as a reserve currency, we're looking at the rise of BRICS. What are we talking about here in the United States? Central bank digital currency. And one valuable usage of that central bank digital currency would be to sort of create a new currency. The same that the Poles have done, the same that the Weimar Germany did create this new central bank digital currency, it would have a different value structure potentially, and it might help to tame or raise some of the inflation that the Fed itself has caused through all of the massive money printing.
Right. And just there's a stat, I had heard it before, but I want you to discuss it because it's such a impactful stat to think about. The money supply pre-2020 and then post-2020, what percentage as far as dollars created, et cetera?
Right. 40% of every dollar currently in existence came into existence in just the last 1.5 years.
That is insane.
40%. And it's even higher if you go back into the Trump administration. So if you go back into 2020, 2019, it's more like 2 out of every $3 are come into existence. So actually, the first article that we published on Orthodox Reflections talking about inflation was during the Trump administration, and we were calling out the Trump administration. Mm-hmm. So this is, again, one of the reasons why we say there's no democracy in America is because everything that is destroying America is bipartisan. Mm-hmm. No one's stopping the printing no one's stopping the deficit spending. There is a total uniparty alignment on those issues. They fight over tangential issues, but they leave that untouched. I mean, who's trying to zero fund the war in Ukraine right now? Now, some of your Republicans are making noise, but who's really doing anything about it?
Right. Yeah, it's funny they can fight back and forth over these issues that get some of us worked up at times. But the second it's something they all really want, like a war or the Patriot Act or something like that, it's like, boom, bipartisan. It's like they're all best friends all of a sudden. And that's the worst time. When that happens, watch out. Every time there's bipartisan approval, it's usually not good, I've noticed.
Oh, I can't stand it when something passes by acclamation.
Yeah, right.
That never, ever works out for us.
Okay, you've hinted at it a few times. I want to talk about one of the best ways we can show the influence of these companies are I have to be careful too. My strikes are expired, so that's a good thing. But the ones I always got were over this topic we're about to touch. So what we saw over 2020, talk about how BlackRock and these companies had an impact on that. So in other words, they owned, I see, I got to be careful. These companies that gave us the shots, talk about the relationship to that.
So BlackRock was the top shareholder in 3 of the major pharma companies that were involved in the mRNA vaccine. And what we know now is that BlackRock essentially reached out and instructed the 3 to cooperate because it is irrelevant to BlackRock who gets a patent, who wins the race. It doesn't matter to BlackRock because they own all 3. They're going to make money either way.
Yeah.
Heads I win, tails you lose. It doesn't matter. And so we focused a lot on our Operation Warp Speed. And those of us who were watching the political space, we were upset with Trump, the way that Trump handled Operation Warp Speed. Well, many of us were, not everyone. That we were throwing money at pharma, and then the results of that was to come up with an untested, unproven mRNA delivered, quote unquote, vaccine that was then mandated and what shoved down our throats. So you use our tax dollars to develop it, and then you use it to harass us with and take away our freedom.
Right.
But we weren't paying attention that behind the curtain is this interlocking ownership. So if you've got BlackRock owning all sides, then imagine the amount of cooperation that was going on between what should have been competing attempts to come up with the best possible solution to what actually wasn't really a problem and didn't even need a solution, but be that as may. So BlackRock was there. And what I covered and what I showed was just some of the just amazing interplay that you were talking about. It just seems like at a certain level, the big asset managers, the big company boards, the big government, big pharma, everything just seems to work together. The big banking system as well.
I know a lot of you guys want to see more beauty in this world, in this culture, because modern art is so degenerate and nihilistic. it does seem that there's a huge need to share the beautiful Christian art. Some artists are working to keep tradition alive. My good friend and friend of the show, Amy Mastrini, Amy the artist, she's been painting for 11 years. She's an Orthodox Christian. She creates icons of Jesus Christ, Mary, the saints, and so on. Her work is done in oil and gold leaf. It's really, really nice. I have some pieces from Amy. It's the perfect opportunity to beautify your home or give a gift to your loved ones for a holiday or a birthday. She sells art prints, stickers, original paintings on her website. Go check it out, amy-the-artist.com. That is amy-the-artist.com. She is currently accepting commissions as well. She says a lot of her work is intended to honor the divine and sacred. How wonderful is that? Go check it out, amy-the-artist.com. Follow her on Instagram at amy_the_artist. Let's get back to the show. I failed to ask about something earlier. It might have been on my first sheet here is one of the things you mentioned, and I want to kind of clarify it for people because it's a lot of impactful words. The fact that someone's going to go listen to this and they might say, well, if we're not in a democracy, Nicholas, what are we in? And I believe the term was command and control oligarchy. Is that what was in the article?
Yes, you're in a command economy.
Yes. Can you explain that for people?
Sure. So if you have we were talking about the three big pharma companies involved. So if all those are majority or have the largest single stake in those happens to be the same company, it is capable of coordinating between those. Or if you have only 6 media companies, for example, in the entire country, 6 major media conglomerates, and the same 2 companies, Vanguard and BlackRock, are the majority shareholders in each of them. And when I say majority, what I mean is controlling shares. That means they own 8%, 10% stakes. So they're going to be the single largest shareholders capable of having representation on the board and capable of actually having influence on how the company itself is run. So I'm not saying that they're out there owning, 100% of Target or 100% of one of these companies. That's just not how share ownership works. But in any event, they are in a position to dictate the economic choices to the corporations. They're obviously tied into the United States government because we practically gave Ukraine to BlackRock as an offering.
I want to get into that too as well.
Sure. So they're tied into the CIA. They're tied into a revolving door through all the regulators. Deborah Birx is she heads up the COVID response. And now she's going to be CEO of a pharma company.
Right.
So all of this cross-contamination, cross-control, just huge slush funds of money, huge, unimaginable amounts of money involved. We don't have a free market the way that we think we do. That's why it seems like so many of these different entities are all singing from the same hymnal in the same church, which coincidentally happens to be owned by, the same asset management companies.
Yes.
It's amazing how that works, but it's purely a coincidence. So it's just not really what we think we've got. And that's why companies will do things that you look at and go, that is completely dumb.
Yes, right.
It's dumb. Why would you ever think to do that? Well, the real people that influence that decision aren't going to be unduly bothered by the fact that a plant closes and puts brewers out of business because they own all the other beers too.
Mm-hmm.
And so they're in a position to dictate what goes on in our economy. They have undue influence over the regulatory bodies. That's called regulatory capture.
Right.
Give some examples of that.
Yeah.
And so that's just kind of where we're at. So nothing ever seems to happen that's good for us, Buck.
No.
When is the middle class? Since the 60s, what we've seen is an erosion of the middle class, an erosion of working class standards. So why does nothing ever good happen for us?
I want to go down. This is where I'm going to be careful, but we'll see. This is where the oligarchs that run this website I'll be on won't like some of the stuff I'm saying. But you guys put a list together just regarding this, the shots.
Mhm.
And there was, it's like, I know some of this stuff, and then I read this article, and it's like, I thought I knew some of this stuff. Some of the stuff's even worse than I had imagined. There was a substantial mishandling and lack of oversight of Pfizer's research into its vaccine. Pfizer admitted that it never actually tested if its vaccine stopped transmission, which I find fascinating because I know you remember, everyone listening remembers early on, that's what the selling point literally was. You can go on YouTube and, well, I don't know about YouTube. You can go on Rumble and find examples of quote unquote leaders telling us that's, if you just take it, it stops transmission. This is what were they calling it? This is a pandemic of the unjabbed. And another one, U.S. researchers and Pfizer were involved in engineering the kind of coronavirus that led to the COVID pandemic in the first place. That one I did not know.
It turns out there's a Japanese researcher just released it today. I've had a chance to really dig into it, but he again is saying what I've heard many others say, that there is no naturally occurring SARS-CoV-2. All of this was engineered, manufactured. All of this came out of the laboratory. The spike protein came from the lab.
Wow. I mean, I suspected that, but and just a few more I want people to hear some of these. Many thousands. Oh well, we already know that. The excessive deaths that I'm not sure even what the mainstream corporate press. They don't really mention it. If they were to, I'm not sure what they're going to blame them on. I suspect climate change at some point. But I think the sad point is BlackRock, Vanguard, the people that pull the strings essentially don't care about that at all. But because their pockets are lying more than they could ever imagine.
Absolutely. And we still don't hear about flu anymore. We still don't hear about cold anymore.
Right.
So we're about to go into cold and flu season. And everything now is about the return of COVID. And at some point, they'll probably rebrand COVID and say that we now have something new if it starts to no longer provide shock value for the average person out there. I guess I'll throw a new brand name at us. But so we don't worry about the traditional respiratory illnesses anymore. We're all COVID all day, all focused right now.
And I started thinking about this, and it seems to be the case. I didn't heavily research it, but you might know. Well, guess, of course, the drug that we weren't supposed to be using throughout 2021 and 2022 that they were calling horse paste. I'm assuming there's no ownership of these three companies over that drug.
Well, it's generic. So there's no money to be made in that. None whatsoever. I mean, we could even go on if you wanted to mention the big R drug that Fauci was so into, that was a repurposed AIDS drug.
Yes.
The nurses, one of the nurses that contributes to our site said that they called it "Run, Death is Near." So when they started to put patients on that, it was worthless. It had absolutely no beneficial value whatsoever. It was actually hurting the patients, as was the aggressive intubation.
Yes, correct.
But, Buck, those billions aren't going to make themselves.
Right, I know.
So sometimes you got to crack a few eggs if you want to make an omelet.
Yeah. And there's a perverse incentive in that the sicker society gets physically, the more money these companies are going to make.
Absolutely.
And so
they're not in healthcare. It's absolutely a misnomer. They're not in healthcare. They're in disease management. And a lot of the diseases are caused by our horrible food supply. You and I both know there are things that are available to eat in the United States that are commonly eaten in the United States, food additives that are not allowed in many other countries in the world.
Right.
We have corn syrup in everything. And we know that, and you can track the excessive use of sugar and then the replacement of sugar with corn syrup in the 1970s. We can look at that with the chronic problems we have with obesity and all the other chronic inflammation-related problems. But all these things are money in the bank or pharma. They're money in the bank. Everything that hurts us, that keeps us sick, that's money in the bank. So the numbers of Americans, 47% of the U.S. population has at least one chronic disease.
Oh, my.
Okay? Think about how much money you can make
Yeah.
treating that, because they're not interested in curing it.
Right.
Nobody wants to cure your diabetes. They want to treat it perpetually. Well, that's your blood glucose monitors. That's your pills. That's potentially down the road your insulin. That's everything that goes into treating that. That's money in the bank for these companies. So we have a sick care industry, a disease management industry. We do not have healthcare in this country.
Yeah, 47% to the people running the show sounds probably low. And they'd probably rather it be up, upwards of 60 or 70%.
Well, I mean, if they keep injecting us with mRNA boosters, they'll get there.
Yeah. Good point. Yeah.
Works out, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does.
It's great work if you can get it, and that's why so many of the medical. So I've got this one doctor that has written for the site multiple times, and she's looking to retire and go into holistic medicine. She's just done. She's been doing this for 40 years, prescribing and COVID was actually her black pill moment on the whole thing, because none of this made any sense to her as a physician. She wasn't trying to treat a test. She was trying to treat a patient. And that was what she'd always been trained for. Then she starts to pay attention to some of the drugs that she's been giving patients routinely. And now, after 40 years of doing this, she's actually looking forward to going back to school, retooling, and becoming more of a holistic practitioner to try to manage health, to promote health.
It's like a way of repentance, I suppose, for her.
She is Orthodox.
Right.
And I think it is, actually.
Yeah. Speaking of killing, another topic I've covered multiple times over the years is the military-industrial complex, which we know of is these companies have all of their hands and tentacles up in there too. And just for people that are listening that aren't aware of who the current defense secretary is, talk about who he is and where he came from, because I'm not trying to insult my audience's intelligence. I know a lot of you listening understand this, but for those who don't, this is just a perfect example of what we're talking about.
So Lloyd J. Austin III was a general in the United States Army. He retired to the board of Raytheon Technologies. So he became a board member in Raytheon. And when I say Raytheon is a defense giant, that doesn't really cover it.
Right.
But I think that's the closest I can come to saying it. And of course, so he served happily, made tons of money on the board of Raytheon. Then he comes back into public service in the Biden administration as the defense secretary. And just to give you some ideas, so the Pentagon has awarded Raytheon billions in business since Lloyd Austin took over. Now, to a certain extent, there's the military-industrial complex is really a closed market. You don't just suddenly go out and develop a missile. So there's a certain number of vendors that are involved in this. But it doesn't hurt to have your guy running the Pentagon.
Yeah. Jeez.
Now, does it?
Right.
Okay. And what's going to happen is when he gets done with his public service, and I put that in scare quotes, actually, in the article, because who is he serving? Which public?
Right.
When he gets done, he'll go right back to Raytheon, and he'll end up sitting on other boards, and he'll have a nice, huge multi-million-dollar nest egg for himself and generational wealth for his kids going out off of, quote unquote, public service.
Yeah.
Now, I'm actually a veteran. I have a son that's serving currently. And, the guys on the ground, the grunts, we don't get this. We don't get these opportunities.
Right.
Okay. We also don't even, I have a son who is not allowed to fire his actual weapon system because it would be too expensive. So they only do simulations. And so his weapon system, they maintain it, but it's one of the tactical missiles. and he's not allowed to ever practice actually firing it because it's too expensive to fire.
Wow.
But Lloyd Austin, he doesn't have problems with his expense account.
No, he does not.
So the grunts do, but Lloyd Austin does not.
And of course, we failed to mention just now, who were the top 3 shareholders in Raytheon?
Vanguard, State Street, and BlackRock. There's a theme.
There is.
And BlackRock was tapped. Yeah, we mentioned it earlier, but we're thinking of the Ukrainian situation.
Yes.
BlackRock was tapped by the Biden administration to manage the reconstruction fund called the Ukrainian Development Fund. So BlackRock is going to be managing that. And one of the things that critics of this have pointed out is Ukraine is so far in debt that they will never, ever possibly be able to repay where they're at. And so is this simply BlackRock going to be managing the takeover of all of the productive assets of Ukraine in exchange for forgiving the debt, looking the other way on the debt? It's an interesting concept, but I mean, how do you end up with an asset management company suddenly running a reconstruction fund for the country of Ukraine, which is in a war that the United States provoked?
Yes.
And which is making billions for our own military industrial complex, which is curiously owned by BlackRock. It's just, I'm going to pause there for a second if you don't mind.
Go ahead.
Somebody listening to this might actually go, this is actually too insane to be real. And I am very sympathetic to that.
Yeah.
But the one of the most amazing things about this is it's not even a conspiracy.
No.
They're doing this is right out in the open. It's Forbes writes articles about it. The Wall Street Journal writes about it. It's right out in your face. There's nothing hidden here. It's completely out in the open.
Yes. And I should also mention throughout this article, there's links throughout. So if people are doubting this, you can go read the article, which I will link to, of course, in the show notes, and you can find the links yourself. It's hard to delineate where BlackRock ends and the government begins. I think that's part of this blob that's not to sound like a boomer, but I suspect the founding fathers weren't in favor of things like this,
Right. Well, I mean, we think of the Federal Reserve as our national bank, but the Federal Reserve is actually owned by banks.
Yes.
It's owned by its member banks. So there's if you think about the 1950s and how many times we invaded countries because their land reform was interfering with the United Fruit Company, hence the term, quote unquote, banana republic, because it's just, we have this tendency to conflate government and private business. But I mean, don't call it fascism. I mean, that would get people upset. But that we call it a public-private partnership. We call it all kinds of things. But what it comes down to is, is it the money dominating the government? Is the government using the money? And does it really matter, given the fact that they're all playing so nicely together? Yeah.
It's all of these topics we've talked about, from 2020 incidents, the shots, the Ukraine thing, the thing that gets so many Americans either sympathetic to it or to blindly trust what they're told, and you alluded to this earlier, is of course the media. And I hope my listeners are kind of catching the trend we're going here. But guess who owns a lot of these media companies? You want to talk about that, Nicholas?
Sure. So I mentioned it, but the major media companies in the United States are Time Warner, Comcast, Disney, and News Corp. Okay? Those 4 control 90% of the U.S. media landscape. The top owners of stock in all of 4 of those companies, Vanguard and BlackRock. Okay? So you have, again, I mentioned, supposedly these are competing organizations, right? They're in a free market. They're supposed to be looking to increase their market share differentiating themselves from their competition. But yet we end up with the same stories spun the same way, supporting the same narrative, because actually they're all owned by the same people. And they're all, so have you ever noticed? I mean, it's like you tune in to the morning newscasts and everyone's got the same talking points.
Yes. Yeah.
And then we sit around, we wonder, how is that possible? But then, of course, you introduce the CIA,
Yes.
the FBI, you introduce the three-letter agencies, you introduce the actual government that we know from the Twitter files. We know that the government itself was also involved. So the government's talking to the asset managers, who's talking to their employees, who in the companies that they own large positions in. The government's talking directly to those same employees. And then they're even embedding former CIA, FBI, and other former employees in these organizations directly.
Mm-hmm. And it's, I think, if you want to call it a blue pill normie or something, if you were to say, like you mentioned, it's amazing how these news groups and news companies all spew the same talking points. I think a blue pill response would be, well, because they're telling you facts. And so if you have a set of facts and the news people report on facts, of course they're all going to say the same thing. I think that's what one excuse would be. And I'm trying to put myself into that mindset. But it's when I realized that News Corp was part of this conglomeration as well, it's no surprise Tucker Carlson was canned, because he was literally the only person on Fox that I thought, boy, he sure sounds different than everyone else. He's actually really good and he seems smart on a lot of these issues.
Right.
Of course, then he's gone.
But who made that decision? You took the guy that had the #1 rated cable news show in the country. This guy is printing money, okay? And you can him. And why?
Right.
So I guess my response to the blue pill is simply this. I mean, how many stories? We can just take Ukraine. Okay. Yeah. How about the goes to Kiev?
Yes. Yeah.
I mean, I could go down the list of story after story that has been picked up and run with. We could even go back further to the Russia paying bounties to jihadists to kill American soldiers in Afghanistan.
Yep.
Or we could talk about how many said, if you take the shot, you won't get sick.
Yep.
And then it was, oh, well, you won't get really sick. And then it's like, oh, well, actually, you're more susceptible to future infections, but take the shot anyway. No matter how many times, you would think that in a normal free market self-correcting system, that you would think that if your story kept blowing up on you over and over again, that you'd learn to write a different story.
Yeah.
But they don't. Okay. Goes back to the whole manufacture of consent. So the news media shows up at news aggregation points, such as the White House, and simply dutifully reports whatever they're given.
Mm-hmm.
And now it appears that they even they take emails from the CIA and just report whatever the CIA sent them. They don't even have to bother to go anywhere to interview anybody.
Right. Yeah. And Tucker just said as much on a podcast. He was on the Adam Carolla show, and he said as much. And and that brings us to Operation Mockingbird. It's something. Again, I'm not trying to insult the intelligence of my audience. I know a lot of you are very familiar with what Operation Mockingbird is, but I want Nicholas to explain it. And then, you know, this is mind-blowing in itself, because it happened a long time ago, but now they don't even have to have an Operation Mockingbird.
Well, hold on. Yeah, it happened when I was 7 years old, so hopefully it wasn't that long ago.
Sorry.
All right. But it was an operation that was born out of the 60s and into the 70s. It was uncovered and reported on in 1977 by a journalist named Carl Bernstein. And he disclosed that the CIA had covertly infiltrated America's most influential news outlets and had over 400 reporters who were considered assets for the CIA. That was Operation Mockingbird. And what had actually got him interested in this was the fact that supposed journalists actually were allowed to wander unsupervised in areas that were supposedly secure, like at Langley. They would walk around like they owned the place. And he got curious as to, well, how is that possible? And so after diving into it, he was able to uncover the fact that the CIA was not just influencing foreign press, was not just influencing foreign elections, but was also influeing our own. So well before 2016 and so-called Russian bot farms
Yeah, right.
on Facebook, the United States has been subjected to electoral interference paid for by our own tax dollars. So that article blew the whistle on Operation Mockingbird. And it was a big scandal at the time. I was too young to remember the scandal, but I've read about it. But now we're just so comfortable with it that we know that former CIA assets, former FBI assets, former military intelligence assets are routinely put on TV as talking heads and are interviewed very politely. They are also just hired outright as news anchors. They're hired as analysts, contributors, and no one thinks twice about it at this point. We can't even get anyone upset about it.
What's up, guys? Your host and humble narrator, Buck Johnson here. And you might notice this recording sounds different than the usual podcast. And that is because I'm sitting outside here in Lockhart, Texas, recording this ad into my iPhone. It probably sounds pretty crappy. Well, I'm doing this to show you something very cool. Many of you guys know that my production team works over at Podsworth Media, and they've been producing my show for quite a while. I get a lot of questions and people asking, who does your podcast? Why does it sound great? And I'm telling you why. It's because the guys at Podsworth are amazing. They've got this brand new online app for taking rough recordings like this and making them a whole lot cleaner and more listenable with just a few easy clicks. It will remove background noise. It reduces plosives. It fixes clipping, which is distortion from recording with the gain up too high. Clipping, which is distortion from recording with the gain up too high, which I can promise you I've done many times, and they fixed this for me. It removes clicks and pops. And then also levels out the dialogue, so there's no crazy where the guest sounds too loud or the interviewer sounds too quiet. Here's what you guys can do. All of y'all that are interested in recording podcasts or audiobooks or anything, if you're a pastor and you want your sermon recorded, whatever the case may be, go to podsworth.com and click Get Started. You drag and drop your audio files or click to open your file manager. This also works on your smartphone's web browser. You customize your settings that you want, but the default works fine on most podcast recordings. Then enter code BUCK50, BUCK50 for 50% off of your first order. You don't need an account, just an email address and payment. And you'll get a download link in your email for your cleaned up files. How cool is this? The guys at Podsworth run everything they do through this app before they do anything else to it. So all of my recordings go through this app that we're talking about. It works great. Like I said, any spoken word recordings, obviously for podcasts, YouTube videos, sermons, audiobooks, whatever, it will make awful recordings sound listenable and much more professional. So, like I said, go to podsworth.com and click Get Started. You can use promo code BUCK50, BUCK50 for 50% off of your first order. You can use promo code BUCK50, BUCK50 for 50% off of your first order. Let's get it. No, you can have someone sitting there, and I don't know if you've tried to do this. I tried about 2 years ago to watch Meet the Press. It's brutal.
Oof.
And it made me think, maybe I was in my own bubble, or I am in my own bubble. I can admit that. And then you watch something like that, and it's like, oh my God, no wonder so many people fall for a lot of this stuff. It's so blatantly propaganda. And then they go to, it's like go to commercial sponsored by Raytheon, sponsored by Pfizer, sponsored by Boeing. And it's like, sure, I get it. I get who pays the bills for these talking points from the CIA now. It makes sense if you look at it. But I don't think a lot of people are going to look at it that way.
No, if you circle back to just the defense industry, for example, okay, one of my favorite defense industry analysts said that the United States does not have a military. Our military is not a classical military. Our military exists to purchase expensive weapon systems to make billionaires more billions. Oof. But we don't have a military that is there to serve as a defense for the United States. Okay, that's why the United States Navy doesn't patrol our seacoast. The United States Navy doesn't defend the United States. The United States Navy is there to buy really expensive systems, frequently that do not work, but it doesn't matter because the spare parts alone are worth billions in contract value. But, the Coast Guard, quote unquote, defends our coasts, whereas our Navy's deployed everywhere else.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And so, we have a National Guard, and National Guard can serve sort of as a home defense. But how many military bases? We have 800 military bases scattered around 160 some odd nations around the world. Yeah, our military force is not here to serve us. It's here to project power, serve commercial interests, and be captive buyers of American military industrial output.
Mm-hmm. Well said. Last topic, because where is this leading is what we're going to hear. So we don't have to watch the corporate news. We can say no to the shot. We can take only natural meds. We can have our dissident opinions. We can be good Orthodox Christians and not take part in this system. We can just go online, buy from small companies, use our bank cards that's tied into. And wait a second, now there's a problem, isn't there? Or there could be.
Could be.
So get into you. We touched on it briefly earlier, the CBDC and how, I mean, I've often said on the show, they don't have to come for your guns. I think in Texas, certainly, maybe in your state too, that would be a very, very, very bloody mistake for a lot of the government. What they can certainly shut down your ability to buy guns.
Absolutely.
And so get into that.
So a central bank digital currency would mean no cash. So could it mean that we would also potentially get rid of the intermediary function that's from the banking system itself, that you actually could have the Federal Reserve literally creating electronic accounts for you and actually directly depositing money into that account? I don't think that's really the case. I think here in the United States, the powers that be are very comfortable with those top tier banks. I think right now we have roughly 5,400 depository institutions. I would see that most likely collapsing down to a handful of banks in a CBDC that we would be able to have the illusion of choice. So, okay, I can open up an account at JP, or I can open an account at Fifth Third. They very big in this society on trying to maintain the illusion of choice. So I think that we would have, but essentially, imagine that you have no cash. You cannot withdraw cash. There are no ATM machines. There is a new dollar that is strictly electronic, and it has to be spent through some type of exchange. Okay, so we've been looking at different proposals. One proposal is to put a chip in your hand to allow you to execute payments back and forth. But it could end up being that some other biologic, could be your thumbprint, it could be some type of biological identification, or it could be just a card. But however the details get worked out, and there is no way to take cash out of the system because there is no cash, go to a gun show and off the grid pay for an AK-47 or an AR or whatever it is that you're making a choice. So if the government decides that they don't want people buying guns, you don't have any way to buy a gun because you would not be able to purchase that. They would know everything that you're purchasing and they would be able to stop it. The potential here is gut-wrenching. So I wrote an article about CBDC, and what I also pointed out in that article was, think about it from a perspective of your church, okay? You're not going to be able to throw $20 in the collection plate. There is no $20. So you're not going to be able to write a check either. You're going to pay digitally. So what happens, for example, with those of us that belong to churches that have difference of opinion with the Patriarch of Constantinople, for example, and then we get branded as radicals?
Yeah.
Then the government simply says, okay, you can't contribute to this church because it's a radical organization. If they did that today, what you would do is you would go, okay, fine. Go pull a few $100s out of the bank and I'm going to pay my tithes that way. There is no cash. So what do? Throw silver coins in to the collection plate? It's an option, but it's only an option if you think about that in advance and you actually have silver.
Uh-huh.
So central bank digital currency is something we're very, very concerned about. It's presented as being, this is going to be a great thing for society because it's going to lead to simpler payment structures. You don't have to worry about carrying cash around. It's going to be so convenient, so convenient, so convenient. But if you're comfortable with the government knowing every single financial transaction in your life, having veto power over every one of those transactions, being able to shut off your ability to donate at will to your church, to a GoFundMe account for someone that you would like to contribute to. If you want that level of control, God bless you. I don't.
And I can hear my friend Cyprian from the Royal Path as someone's going to say, well, we might get there eventually. This technology's here. It's here. I don't want someone to think that this could be something in 5 years from now or something like that. This CBDC has been floated out there already. Am I correct in that?
Absolutely. So right now, China actually has a digital yuan pilot program that they're using to pay salaries. The Bahamas has a digital dollar that's legal tender now. Australia, Thailand, Brazil, India, South Korea, and Russia are all running or preparing to launch CBDC projects. Now, that last one coming up with Russia. So one thing that sometimes we get told as Orthodox Christians is that we maybe idolize Russia a little bit too much. Look, Russia is a major power that's run by a balding, paunchy, older bureaucrat. Okay, they're not run by the czar who is anointed by God. It's another bureaucratic state, and they do some good things and they do some bad things. And so Russia being at the forefront of digital currency, I don't consider to be a good thing, but it's okay. I'm used to being disappointed by large bureaucratically run states. So,
and another thing I want people to think of is I'm going to go out on a very strong limb, I think, here. And if you're listening to this show, you will have opinions online or offline, certainly, but maybe online that won't be allowed with particular regimes. And for instance, you've probably been kicked off. We know my show has been multiple times, has been stricken and multiple episodes taken down. If your purchasing power is controlled by the people that don't like your opinions, well, if your ESG score is too low, maybe you don't get to buy things this week. If you've been purchasing too much beef, and that's bad for the environment, cows make the environment worse, we're going to go ahead and shut that off for this month. You purchased too much. You can have bugs and soy, but not. So I want people to think of these possibilities. They're not fun to think about, but it's at least an exercise and something that could happen.
Absolutely. I'll tell you a quick story. I was friends with a gentleman in Poland who was getting older, and he had been one of the regional military commanders under martial law. And he had been personally responsible for some of the atrocities that occurred, not just the mass arrests or the consignment to concentration camps, but also shootings as well.
Wow.
Targeted assassination. And I had a chance to really dive into this. And I said, look, you had been to the West, right? Oh, yeah. I was a military man. I'd gone on exchanges and whatever. And I said, you saw the fact that in the West, they live better. Sure. Average person was much wealthier. Just crossed the border into West Germany. Okay. Well, then what was all this about? So he laughed and he said, we were gods. And if you think about Orwell, think about some of the things that Orwell said in his book, 1984. So these are individuals, these are people that, yes, they get money. They can make money. And you can be really, really rich. But what if you're the lord of the manor when everyone else is a serf?
Yeah.
Isn't that so much more gratifying than just being rich when everyone else has also got a chicken in every pot?
Yes.
These are many of the people who are behind these impending regimes of censorship and control. It's the control. The money's great too. And they find ways to make tremendous amounts of money off this, but it's obviously kind of a sociopathy.
Yes.
They're looking for control.
Yes, and we saw that on a minor scale of sorts over 2020 and 2021. I know all of us ran into someone in a store or someone on the street yelling at us to put a mask on. It was a low status individual, no power, but it made them feel like if they were repeating the talking points of the regime to a dissident, backwards fool like myself, that gave them some sort of status or power. And it was just a little bit, but we saw it happen a lot during those years.
It's very addictive.
Yeah, it's
very addictive. So
awful.
Hayek, when Hayek was writing about the rise of totalitarianism, Hayek would say that, your middle managers within the bureaucracy are typically not very intelligent.
Right.
They're very dogmatic, but they love that power, that control that comes from this. And these are very, very dangerous people.
Yes, it is. Well, if we can find some bright spot in this, what are ways people are going to hear this, and they always do? Well, what are we supposed to do? What are we supposed to do then? Especially, and I'm not mocking people, by the way. I always ask that when I hear podcasts like this. We're both Orthodox Christians. A lot of my audience is, and maybe if not Orthodox, just Christians in general in my audience. What type of things should we prep for? What are some steps to take, since a lot of this stuff is likely coming?
So there's so much you can do. My goodness, that's a whole new show in and of itself.
Exactly.
Okay?
Yes, and it might be one. So,
but I guess real fast, get to know the people in your parish. So if you're Orthodox, or if you're not Orthodox but you do go to a church, get to know the people in your parish. Get to know what their skill sets are. Get to know who's the former military. Get to know who has skills that can be of service to you in any kind of crisis or any kind of ongoing civilizational problem that we could face. But having contacts and knowing people, they tend to try to push us to virtualize our lives. You get to know people on Facebook and pretend some guy in California when I'm in Florida is my friend. Your friends are the guys that you're going to have coffee with on Sunday after consuming the Eucharist together. That's your friends. But also, I mentioned it, you can fight City Hall. And so we have an article up on Orthodox Reflections right now that is written by an activist, and he's talking about how to organize at the local level and how to create a successful political organization among friends, a band of brothers, people to work together. So, humans are social animals, and we're going to get through this as a society. Now, it may not be what we think of as macro society, but we're going to be forming individual societies. And within Orthodoxy, the parish has always tended to be our basic unit of organization if we didn't have a monastery to go hide in. But so think about local, my parish, maybe my local group that I work with, that we collaborate on local items that we actually can do something about. You can do something about your local libraries. You can't do anything about the military-industrial complex.
Right.
But you can do something about your local libraries, your local schools. You can homeschool your children. You can cooperate with other homeschooling parents so that you have those deep social connections and ties that you can work together. Another thing I would recommend on a practical basis, so skills that you can barter, anything that you have that you could barter with, or gold, silver, any type of precious metal investments. Because precious metal, they can't regulate that. If I hand you a silver coin for a bushel of corn in a CBDC environment, the only way they really know that transaction occurred is if they came in and audited all of your bushels of corn on the farm.
Right.
Okay, so that is, in the absence of cash, coinage, particularly silver, which is less valuable than gold and which can be traded more readily for things that you may need. I stock up on food. I've got plenty of dehydrated food, as well as rice and other things that are long-lasting, long preserved. But then again, I'm also in Florida, so you never know when the big one's going to hit us, and the Cat 5 means, so there's several reasons for me to do that, as opposed to just particularly, worry about this. But also, I have a solar still that boils water for cooking. So in case because the sun's going to be shining at some point.
Right.
So think about things like that. How do I prepare food? How much food do I want to stock up with? There's a lot of options there. And what I like to do is I like to just also, tell the truth. And that's how I ended that particular article. They fear discontent because they're aware of the fact that we are complicit in our own slavery.
Yes.
And so you look at what's happening to the January 6th sentences that are being handed down that are just awful. They're telling you, don't go to D.C.
Yeah.
Don't mass. Keep your discontent to yourselves. We'll either censor you or we'll arrest you. Don't challenge the regime. And I feel like the more that we tell the truth, the more we stand on the truth, particularly through our orthodoxy, because people have shortchanged exactly how corrosive orthodoxy has been to tyranny. The Soviet Union is gone, but the church sprang right back.
Yep.
Okay. If you think about the iconoclastic emperors, they did everything they could to crush the faith, and they failed. So orthodoxy is very resilient and forms that basis for just telling the truth. And the truth has a tendency to mobilize people in ways that we can't even necessarily foresee right now.
Well put. All right, Nicholas. I suppose it's just Orthodox Reflections to plug, but go ahead.
Oh, thanks. Well, I appreciate everyone's time today. And please visit us at orthodoxreflections.com. And really appreciate you having us on, Buck.
Thank you. It's always good to have you on, Nicholas. Appreciate this. This has been a good chat. We'll see you soon. All right. I hope you guys enjoyed that discussion. I definitely did. Next week, it's a real big one. It's a big one, friends. Jonathan Pajot is going to be on the show. I'm really looking forward to putting that one out. And let's see if any of you guys are going to the event in North Carolina this weekend. I will see you there that our wonderful friend Rebecca, Dissident Mama, is putting on. Let's see what else we got. Twitter, @BuckRebel, BuckRebel is my handle on there. You can follow me. Of course, subscribe to this channel on YouTube, and you can watch us. And I think that's about all I got. Orthodox Reflections, yes. Go visit them, of course. As you heard, they got some good things over there. But this podcast, counterflowpodcast.com is a website. And until next week, y'all have a good one.
You get split in half, but I call him the hologram graph. But I am the center inside the placenta of math. You clash with cyanide gas and die fast. Rhythmical equivalent of solids, liquid and gas. We smash your sinus with the power of Lord Titus. But I am the virus inside of the iris of Cyrus.
Like the sound of the Counterflow podcast? Our audio production is provided by Podsworth Media. Check them out at podsworth.com.